We have a lot of news to cover in today's video, including the latest NHL trade rumors on players like John Klingberg. Could the Canucks actually trade JT Miller? There's some rumors around him right now, plus the Edmonton Oilers are considering a few moves apparently. Plus we have a big day in Montreal with a new general manager. We have updates on the All-Star game, Willie O'Reilly jersey retirement, and we have some updated COVID protocols and news from the waiver wire. All that and more coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have a ton of news to talk about here today, as well as some trade rumors. So let's dive right in and get started. First up, we probably saw the big news of the day earlier on with the Montreal Canadiens announcing new general manager Kent Hughes. There is a dedicated video on the channel from earlier today. I'll put it up here in the YouTube cards. So if you didn't get a chance to see that earlier, if you want more details, certainly you can watch that in its entirety. But just a quick summary here. Essentially, Kent Hughes is born and raised in Montreal, has worked a long time in the U.S. in the Boston area as a agent for about 20-25 years, represents some top players like Bergeron, Letang, Darnell Nurse, Drake Batherson, Anthony Beauvillier, and several others, including Anton Hudobin, Colin White, Mike Matheson, and others. So he's certainly a very well-respected guy. Obviously, tons of experience when it comes to negotiating contracts. I think he'll be a great fit. Has known Gorton a long time. Obviously, he's worked in the Boston area for a long time. Gorton's from there. They've worked together during his time with the Rangers as well. Of course, as Gorton as a GM there would have dealt with you. So there's a trust there, a long-lasting relationship, and I think they'll be able to kind of be on the same page. It looks like it should be a good fit. I think we'll give them a good chance here to see what they can do. Of course, something else here that's kind of unique about this situation as well. Kent Hughes also has two sons that are both aspiring professional hockey players. His oldest son, Riley's already been drafted, and he was a draft pick of the New York Rangers when Jeff Gorton was the GM. Riley is currently playing at Northeastern University, and his other son is Jack Hughes. Yes, we're likely going to have two players by the name of Jack Hughes in the NHL in the near future. His son Jack is not yet drafted. He will be eligible this year in the 2022 NHL draft and is expected to be a first-round pick. Now, in the case of Riley, the older boy, he was a late pick, a seventh-rounder by the Rangers, so it's hard to say what his long-term progression is as an NHL player, but Jack's expected to be a first-rounder and has a much higher ceiling by the looks of things. They both play at Northeastern University in Boston, and of course, at that same school, they have a couple of teammates that are Montreal Canadiens prospects, including Jordan Harris. Now, Harris is a pretty highly regarded prospect who I think it's fair to say the Montreal Canadiens were worried and concerned that they would not be able to sign. There's been a lot of thoughts that he might be looking to sign elsewhere once he's done college and his eligibility runs out with the Habs and he can become an unrestricted free agent, but that certainly increases the odds of the Habs being able to get him. I'm sure Jeff Gorton wouldn't hire Kent Hughes over one prospect, but it's probably, I guess, something you could call, a little bit of a side effect, but certainly Harris, well known to Hughes. Not only is he teammates with his boys and friends with his boys, but Kent Hughes apparently also coached a bit when he was younger, when his boys were younger, and Coach Jordan Harris too. So he's well familiar with the new Habs general manager. So I would like to think that it probably increases the odds of them getting Harris under contract immensely, which is certainly a big plus because he's a really solid looking defense prospect that I know they were concerned they may not be able to get. So we'll see where that goes, but certainly a big day in Montreal. I know there's some reactions that were negative because it doesn't sound like a French Canadian, but like I said, he was born and raised in Montreal. He does speak French. I don't really see what the big deal is. To me, he checks all the boxes. Doesn't have a French name per se. Hasn't lived in Quebec for a while, but to me, for all intents and purposes, he is a Quebecer, and it looks like he's a very well-equipped, well-experienced, smart guy who deserves an opportunity. So we'll see what he can do, along with Gorton, to get the Habs back on track. And if you want more details and a little bit more thoughts on the process and everything that went through, as well as the other candidates that were interviewed, you can check out the dedicated video on the channel from earlier today. We do get some news here as well in the All-Star game. The voting has taken place for the last man in candidates. Of course, each division was able to add one extra player by vote. Those votes are concluded. The Metropolitan Division actually was able to vote in Mika Zibanejad, but he will not be able to go. Apparently, he's pulled out for personal reasons. We don't know what those are since they're personal, but he's not going. So it's kind of a shame in a way, because we've seen the Rangers and their social media accounts really pumping Mika for votes, and now he's not going to go. So apparently he's being replaced by Jake Gensel. Troy Terry, of course, who's been on a tear this year with the Ducks, he won the Pacific Division vote. So that's certainly good for him. I think he certainly deserves to be there. Steven Stamkos won the vote for the Atlantic Division. Nazem Kadri of Colorado, who's certainly well-deserving, having a career season at the Avalanche, wins for the Central. So those are your 4 additional players that will be heading to Vegas for the All-Star Game. Of course, tonight's also a really big night in Boston. By the time this video hits YouTube, the ceremony is probably already going to be taking place, which I believe right now, as I record this, is scheduled to start taking place within the next hour, so I'm not sure if this will hit YouTube in time, but either way, Willie O'Ree, who broke the color barrier way back in 1958, is having his number 22 sent to the rafters tonight by the Boston Bruins. This is extremely important and significant. He has done so much for the game of hockey and broken down barriers and inspired so many other people of color to join and not be afraid to attempt to play professional hockey. Like, he was really a big inspiration for a lot. He's really been a big inspiration for many. I know I'm extremely proud to say that I share a hometown with him. Willie O'Ree was born and raised in Fredericton, New Brunswick, where I also born and raised and live currently. So we're very proud of our hometown hero and Willie O'Ree. We have one of our rinks that was built here in the last 10 or 12 years or so. We had a new arena built, and it was named after him. So we're extremely proud. Unfortunately, he doesn't get home more to do more stuff, but clearly he lives in the U.S. now. Unfortunately, he's not going to be able to physically be in Boston at this event because of different restrictions and COVID and stuff, but he will be certainly watching. I'm not sure if they'll bring him in remotely. I believe he does have a speech prepared. I don't know if it's going to be recorded or how they're going to do that. We'll have to wait and see. But certainly 64 years ago today was an extremely significant day in the NHL. He was a great-grandson of slaves who immigrated, eventually found their way to New Brunswick. He was born into a family of 13, so his parents had a huge family, which was extremely challenging back then. He played majority of, if not all of his professional career with one eye basically blind. Like, he didn't even tell anybody. He lied about his eyesight for a long time because he was told he needed to retire, but he didn't want to quit. He wanted to keep pushing. He's just such an inspiration, such a great man. He's been such a great ambassador for the game. Obviously getting himself, a Hall of Fame recognition recently. It's well deserved. This guy just deserves everything and all the accolades. And it's so nice to see 22 going up to the rafters in the Garden in Boston. Can't wait to see that here shortly on TV. So certainly check that out if you have a chance tonight. In my opinion, it's a pretty significant moment. Now, we also have word today as well from the Women's League, from the PHF, which is formerly known as the NWHL, that they're really getting some extra money pumped into the league, and they're going to be doubling their salary cap and expanding by 2 franchises, one in Canada and one in the States. The Canadian one apparently is going in Montreal. We don't know the location yet of the American-based team, but still, that's significant news that they've been able to secure, I think it was $25 million over the next 3 years. That's been guaranteed to be able to pump up the cap and allow these players to make more money. Certainly starting to see more growth, which is fantastic for the women's game, and I really hope that continues and really means that they're able to, eventually get a deal here and get backed by the NHL. That needs to happen to really gain that ultimate stability, I think. But it's a big step in the right direction, so that's awesome news as well. We also got word today that Jake Muzzin of the Leafs, after suffering a big hit the other night. I believe it was in the game against the Blues. It was going to be out for at least a week. Could be longer because he has been diagnosed with a concussion. He wasn't feeling well, had some different symptoms, and after going through testing, they've determined a concussion is what the issue is. So it's certainly not great. You don't want to see anybody deal with concussions because they're unpredictable. You really can't tell exactly how long they're going to be out. And of course, there's always a long-term effect of it as well, which you really don't want to see players go through. But unfortunately, with a high-impact sport like this, it is something you see more often than you'd like. So we'd like to wish Jake Muzzin well, but that's a big blow for the Maple Leafs for the short term at least. And of course, we do have news on the waiver wire today too. Yesterday's players that were on waivers, which were from Montreal and Arizona, both those players cleared. There were no claims made, so they can be reassigned to Taxi Squad or AHL. And we have two more players on waivers today, which include Jamel Smith of the Tampa Bay Lightning and William Lagesson of the Edmonton Oilers. So we'll see at 2 o'clock Eastern time tomorrow if there are additional claims or if anything happens or more players on waivers. I think we're probably bound to see some increases in that here as we get a little bit closer here to the break coming up. Well, I guess it's not going to be much of a break for many because we did have an All-Star break and an Olympic break, but that's going to be filled in. We should have more updates on the schedule within the next day or two. A lot of teams are going to be making up a lot of those games during that time, but it's certainly a key point in the season where teams are going to be looking to start making some moves to start preparing for the deadline, which is, obviously still a little bit of ways in March, but you got to start preparing for end of season. Of course, with the All-Star game coming after that, which is obviously not too far from now, we're going to be seeing some changes in the NHL COVID protocols, which should prevent a lot of future games from being postponed and really allow the NHL to hopefully complete the season on time without extending. At least that's what we're led to believe with the new schedule that we're going to see, that they're hoping to not to have to do that. So what the rules are going to be changing is that players will no longer be obligated to be tested unless they're symptomatic or if they need to travel between Canada and the United States because it's required for the border. They can't control what the federal authorities in Canada and the U.S. require to enter the country. So clearly, as long as that's a requirement, they're going to have to do that regardless if they like it or not. And of course, if a player is showing signs of being sick and have symptoms, of course, that makes total sense to test them. But if they're asymptomatic, they're not going to be doing that any longer. They're going to be following suit here with the NFL and the NBA as well, which will cut down a lot of false positives and will also cut down a lot of players in COVID protocol with zero symptoms, which, as much as there's going to be some risk here, I think we have to admit that. But at the same time, I think there's also some benefits from it. So to me, if you look at it, here's the other thing to think about with all this. 73% of the NHL players on rosters this year have tested positive this year. Once you test positive, you don't have to do another test for 90 days because once you've had COVID, you're very likely to continue testing positive for that time frame. So a lot of those players are not going to be required to be tested for the next few months anyway. And out of that 73%, 60% of the roster players have been tested positive in the last 5 weeks. So it's a long time here. So there's a big chunk that would have been not required to be tested anyway. So I understand the risk, but if you think about the number of players that wouldn't even be tested anyways because they've already had it, it's such a big chunk that I think reduces their risk. So hopefully it doesn't lead to anything, negative for people getting sick. That's the last thing we want. Health and safety has to be a priority, but it seems to be the way a lot of places are trending and they're following suit. So to me, if everybody can stay safe and they can get through this season, at the end of the day, that's what's most important. And we just hope that they're successful and this turns out to be the right decision. Now, before we go further in the video, I do need to pause for a moment and acknowledge our channel sponsor, Manscaped. Name a better duo than McDavid and Draisaitl this season. I've got one. Manscaped in grooming. That's right, our sponsors at Manscaped, the global leaders in below-the-waist grooming, have all the best tools to clean up your whole act when it comes to your hygiene for men. It's time to skate on the first line with the global leaders here in men's hygiene and join the movement at Manscaped, where you can get the Performance Package 4.0, which includes the Lawnmower 4.0, as well as some fantastic new products just recently launched, including the brand new 2-in-1 shampoo and conditioner. This is a terrific product. Allows you to wash your hair in one fell swoop, leaves you smelling great. It has a refined cologne quality fragrance attached. Absolutely phenomenal. And of course, the other new product most recently launched is the premium body wash to kind of complete the set. But that's not all. Manscaped has new products coming out here yet again in January, so you want to stay tuned. The body wash gives you deep hydration, keeps you smelling great, and not only smelling great, but feeling moisturized as well. Join the movement at manscaped.com and use promo code TSH for 20% off and free shipping. That's promo code TSH for 20% off and free shipping. So thanks very much for watching our promotional content. I greatly appreciate it. Also, it's not in the Manscaped ad that just aired, but they launched 2 brand new products today, which they're super excited about. They have a brand new deodorant as well as a moisturizing body spray. I'll show you a couple of quick pictures here on the screen. They really got the full market here of male grooming cornered. Some great, exciting new products, and I highly recommend you check it out. Manscaped.com. Use our promo code TSH to get 20% off, as well as always getting free shipping with that as well. Now into the trade rumor section of the video. A lot of talk from Jeff Merrick and Elliot Friedman about John Klingberg and maybe the Carolina Hurricanes being the favorite here to land the 29-year-old right-shot defenseman from the Dallas Stars organization, who we've heard reports recently from the same guys here in Hockey Night in Canada and 32 Thoughts that the Dallas Stars are really motivated to get a deal done, and they're kind of ramping things up to hopefully get a trade done sooner than later. This might be a deal that goes down well ahead of the trade deadline. Like I had mentioned before, in my own opinion, I really thought they should get a deal done, because I'm not convinced they're going to be a playoff team. Even if they are, it's clear and apparent that he's not part of your future and he doesn't want to be there. At least that's how I take it from what I've seen and heard and read. And you know what? At the end of the day, even if they do make the playoffs, they're not really looked upon as being a contender. Now, you can never say never, of course, because you just don't know what happens in the playoffs. But to me, like, we've seen teams still go into the playoffs minus a player like that, and it's the right decision. The Hurricanes are already loaded on the back end, already a powerhouse in the NHL. I can just imagine adding a guy like Klingberg. I mean, other teams have been mentioned recently, like the Blues. We've heard the Islanders. We've heard even like teams like the Ducks and the Kings to an extent. But to me, I'm not entirely convinced they make a move on a rental unless they can get him signed, of course, and getting an extension done will increase his value. So you have to think where Dallas has already given him consent to speak through his agent about other deals with other teams. Like, you have to think that might end up being part of it. If a team wants to pony up the money and get ahead of free agency and get a deal done, that might be what happens. Or it might be a case where they don't find that and they have to send him off as a rental, and he becomes one of the bigger names in free agency in the offseason. That's a real possibility too. But right now we're hearing from American Freeman that the Hurricanes seem to be all over the Klingberg, and they think that right now they might be the favorites to get it done. But I wouldn't completely rule out some of these other teams. I really think that Dallas is going to have a bunch of options, and I would say though they probably would prefer to send them east, which is quite often. You don't want to see teams ideally trading within division. It's something that a lot of them don't like to do. They don't want to make their division rival stronger in the process, especially when you're trading the best player in the deal. That's something you try to avoid. But, the Islanders, like I said before, make a lot of sense for Klingberg to an extent. But unless they can keep winning and are more trending towards the playoffs, I don't see them looking to add. They could go after him in free agency if he gets there. But, Carolina, this is one of the years for them to really go all in here, I think, and they'll be a force in the playoffs for sure. Now, when it comes to the Oilers, certainly some interesting things going on there. We've heard a variety of things from Oilers rumors right now. It looks like Ken Holland is kind of sitting tight, but we've seen interviews today with Leon Draisaitl. We saw one a few days ago with Connor McDavid after the Saturday night loss to the Senators. And those two guys seem so frustrated. Like, I think they need to do something and figure something out very quickly here. And they could do a couple of things. I saw an article today linking them possibly to Josh Brown of the Ottawa Senators. Now, he's not going to help you score a bunch of goals, but the argument was that they're not tough enough to play against, and they could use a big, strong blue liner who's willing to play physical and, not afraid to drop the gloves and just kind of have a little bit more of a presence back there. And Josh Brown will give you that. He's 6'5", 230 pounds, not afraid to fight. Not the swiftest defensively. He's okay. Like, he's found his way. He's had his struggles in Ottawa. I've seen a ton of Senators games, and he's been scratched a lot too. So I'd proceed with caution there. Like, you will get some good benefits, but you're also not getting a strong defensive player, in my opinion. I don't really think that's the complete answer, but I did see some articles, I think it was the Edmonton Journal, suggesting that would be a player they should target. I don't know about that. Now, the other thing, we've heard Ken Holland say numerous times that he won't trade his first-round pick or a top prospect for a rental, and I don't entirely blame him, but does that mean he wouldn't do that for a player with term? Or maybe make another trade, even if it's not your first-round pick? A lot of people think that they need to go out and get a goalie, especially with Skinner going into COVID protocol. Like, they're in desperate need here, and maybe a guy like a Jake Allen, for example, or a Varlamov of the Islanders, if either of those guys could be made available by those teams, who they get more than just this year on the contract, that might be a wise move. Like, Jake Allen could go in there, and look what he did last year for Montreal. You can't look into stats too much this year. The team in front of him has been horrific. He's been hurt a couple of times. Like, you really can't, you got to throw that out the window, in my opinion. Look at last year, what he did when Price was out, and he's had some long stretches a couple of times where he really held the fort down in Montreal and allowed them to be a playoff team. And then Carey Price took the ball and ran with it. And this could be what we get here, that he could be that stabilizing force that helps get them to the playoffs. And if Mike Smith can take over and run with it, great. If not, you have him to rely on as your number two guy, who's more steady, at least more consistently than normally what you get with Koskinen. That might be a good option. Varlamov, I'm not completely convinced is available just yet. As we get closer to the deadline and the Islanders don't climb back in the race, I can see that being a real serious option though. The Islanders need to find a way to shed some salary. They need to be able to get some help on defense and more scoring up front, and they're going to have to possibly consider doing this in the offseason anyway. They have Ilya Sorokin, who's more than capable of running with the ball between the pipes, and Varlamov might have to part ways here, so a team like Edmonton could really benefit from either of those guys. I personally think the odds are better for Jake because we know Montreal's out of it. The Habs are more likely to come to the decision to sell quicker than the Islanders will. So we'll see what they do, but those are a couple players I've seen linked to the Oilers or suggestions that they should be going after, and now some of my thoughts there. I'd love to know what you think as well. Certainly they need to figure something out quick because it's getting ugly in Edmonton with these comments from the reporters and the players, and it's getting nasty. Something has to change in a hurry. And I've seen some suggestions too that the Canucks might be prepared to trade JT Miller and that the Rangers are very interested in Miller. I think it's more of a case of interest on the Rangers side. I'm not convinced the Canucks are really looking to make any trades right now. I think they're still trying to climb their way back into the race, which Bruce Boudreau has done a great job. They went, I think it was about 8 or 9 straight wins that they had. Then they had a couple of losses, but then they've gotten back in the win column. Like, I don't think they're anywhere near making decisions on some of these guys. But if we get closer to the deadline and they're not in it, I think we could see, I don't think we're going to see the Canucks tear it down or anything like that, but I can see maybe a vet or two moving out to shake things up because clearly the Boudreau effect helped, but it might not be the only thing they need longer term to get themselves back on track for next year. And I can see a player like Miller maybe, and I just stress maybe, being a player that they might consider doing that with. Like between Miller, Horvat, Besser, I could see maybe one of them getting moved to shake things up and see if they can bring in a different dynamic. The Rangers apparently have heavy interest in him. Of course, a player they're familiar with from the past as well. Very consistent player typically. The Canucks probably could get a good return. Maybe a guy like Philip Hedl, Vitaly Kravtsov. Those young players that are pretty solid, potential up-and-coming guys still. Could be in the mix there as well as, there's always draft picks involved. So they could get a decent package for him if they wanted to consider that. They can create some cap flexibility, like, throw in Kravtsov with guys like Pettersson and Höglander and Podkolzin, might really create a really solid dynamic top 6, top 9 group of guys. So we'll see what happens. But apparently there's interest. I think it's fair to say the interest is on the New York side. I don't know if Vancouver's there yet, but if they're not there in a playoff spot, I can see them maybe visiting that deal down the road as we get closer to March. So let me know your thoughts on what we discussed here today down in the comments. We'll discuss further. If you're new to this channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with all the latest news, rumors, and analysis on all 32 NHL teams. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.